Today, I'd love to talk to you about aging. Now, it may not be everyone's favorite topic, but it might be on your mind. Whether you're concerned about your dog getting older and wondering what's ahead, or how to cope with what your dog is experiencing right now, or maybe yourself. I get a lot of people in my orbit, so to speak, and they talk about, how they feel really stiff and sore and they can't keep up with their dog, because they're having their own issues with aging. So I want to talk to you today about how we can redefine aging and have this process, this journey that we're taking through life to be a bit smoother, a bit easier, and maybe a lot more fun at the same time. So, in case we're meeting for the first time, my name is Mary Debono, and this is the Easier Movement, Happier Dogs podcast. So, yeah, aging. I actually wrote a book called Grow Young with Your Dog, and that book has done really well. I first published it 10 years ago, and it continues to sell. And it was an Amazon #1 bestseller, won a few awards. And what it's about is this idea that yes, aging happens, right? We get older, or dogs get older, but there's so many things we can do as the process unfolds to help ourselves and our dogs feel younger, to have more vitality, to have greater mobility, flexibility, better balance, all those good things that keep us feeling young. So let's talk about some common misconceptions about aging. A lot of people think that, degeneration is just inevitable. Okay. So, and by the way, what I'm talking about concerns you as well as your dog. So it's pretty interchangeable. Of course, dogs have generally a shorter lifespan than us, unfortunately. So the aging process does take a different shape with them. So, but if you think about it, like I know when I was in my late 20s, I started already thinking that, oh, I have to expect these aches and pains because I'm getting older. Because at the time, I did have a lot of aches and pains that actually started when I was a teenager. And they plagued me until I discovered or stumbled across something called the Feldenkrais method, which then I took a deep dive in, went to school for 4 years to learn it, and I've been practicing it ever since. And that was more than 30 years ago. So, we have to think about that. So aging in many ways is relative, right? So I meet a lot of people. I've met a lot of people through my practice that have come to me with aches and pains. And again, have that same attitude that I had that, well, this is inevitable. I'm in my 30s. Before you know it, I'll be 40. I have to expect this kind of wear and tear and, you know, breakdown, if you will. And I have to say that in so many ways, I feel younger now than I did when I was in my late 20s. And other people have told me the same thing. I work with a woman who's 75. She's amazing. She's incredibly fit, active. She's a big time hiker. She travels. She does all these things. And when I first met her almost 30 years ago, she was a lot quote unquote older than she is now. She had a lot of aches and pains. She thought that they were just going to get worse. But through, helping her learn how she could take ownership, if you will, of how she moved, how she felt, right? She changed the trajectory of her life. And that's what I want to do for you and your dog as well. So again, some misconceptions about aging involve, like, we just think, oh, it had, like, once we start feeling stiff or sore, or things start to, have issues, that it's all going to be downhill. And I have to say that based on my experience and the experience of many, many, many individuals, human and non-human, that I've worked with, that doesn't have to be the case. Okay. There's a lot of precious things that come out of the aging process, I might add as well. So Think about, though, when you have a negative mindset around aging, if every birthday is like, oh no, not another one, right? Think about what that does to you psychologically, but also physically. It's like you're telling your nervous system that things are going to get worse. I'm a big proponent of giving your nervous system evidence that things can get better, okay? And to help train your brain to look for those things and to do more of those things, okay? So, we have to remember that our brains are prediction making machines. So, if we're telling ourselves over and over again that things get worse as we get older, well, what do you think's going to happen, right? But instead, if we can give ourselves evidence, experiences that we can improve, okay, we can improve our movement, for example, we can improve how we feel, we can improve how we think about things, right? Now you're giving your brain evidence that things can get better and aging is not as scary. Now, luckily, our dogs are not encumbered by, at least as far as I know, they're not encumbered by this constant chatter that we have in our own brains, like telling us things like, oh no, another birthday, as it's such a negative thing. So they don't have that, which I find very, very helpful. So, over the years, I have worked with lots and lots of senior dogs, younger ones too, of course, but many, many senior dogs that had different things going on with them. Some it was they had a stroke, some they had really severe arthritis in the spine or the hips or the elbows or wherever. Um, Others had, injuries, knee ligament injuries, things like that, or muscle strain, or just overall stiffness. And, you know, I have to say, in so many ways, it's a lot easier to help your dog feel younger than to help another human feel younger because the dog doesn't have all those preconceived notions that, oh no, things have to get worse, that I'm getting older. So in some ways, they really have it a little bit better than us in that regard. Okay. But we can change our thinking around aging. We really can. We can change our thinking around it. And as we go through the rest of this episode together, I would love to share some ideas about how you can do that. So, again, let me give you, so I just gave you a human story about how a woman who's now 75 is kind of younger than she was 30 years ago. So let me give you one about a dog. Um, there was a dog who, she was a senior dog, and she used to love to go on walks, loved going on walks. And she would actually wake up her person every morning with, she would wake her up to go for a walk, and the dog would already have the leash in her mouth. Like, she was so excited to go on a walk. And then as she got older, she stopped wanting to go on walks. She stopped waking up her person in the morning with the leash in her mouth, and she had to really be coaxed to go on walks, and they got shorter and shorter. She seemed to just be happy lying in the sun in the yard. And of course, her person took her to the vet, and there wasn't anything that they could do medically, really. There wasn't anything really definitive. And she was on, proper food, and she had the right joint supplements and all the things they could do to support the dog. But, this is just kind of how she was. And it was just expected. Well, she's getting older. And then this woman had heard about my work. And so she asked me to work with her dog. And it was really interesting because I was able to help this dog just have more flexibility in her back. Okay. And it's a very gentle approach. And again, I introduce you to that approach in my book, Grow Young with Your Dog, but I'll also link to the story about this dog. I did a blog post about it, so I will link to that in the show notes. So I really helped her feel like how she could use her back more effectively, which then freed up her legs to be more comfortable. And, it was, I didn't take away any arthritis that the dog had, but just by helping her learn to use her body in a different way, to distribute the effort of moving in a more equitable way, a more efficient way, the dog just perked up. It's like she felt so much better. And the very next morning, she came to the bed in the morning with a leash in her mouth and said, "Let's go for a walk." So it's stories like that that really inspire me. Now, we didn't change her chronological age, right? Of course, I didn't have a time machine. And probably if we took radiographs, her spine would have looked the same as far as the amount of arthritis she had. But it was that ability now, I kind of reminded her nervous system that she could move differently. So that's another example of how she got younger. And what was really fun about that was because the person who owned the dog, hate to use the word owned, but her guardian, I'll say, her human guardian, a human person, was, in that age as well, where she's thinking about her own aging process. And I introduced her to some Feldenkrais method movements for herself, and she also felt better. And she said, "I can't believe how much more fun walking is now for both of us." So that's really cool. And that is always my idea, is that you and your dog will improve together, right? And just experience life differently, with that idea that there's this hope, what we call biological optimism, that things can get better. Now, some of you may say, well, my dog is 16, 17, 18, I don't know, 20. I've worked with dogs at 20 years old. Well, how much better can they get? And there is definitely a limit. So I don't want to sugarcoat, to mislead you, in that you can always have this dramatic turnaround of the clock. But what I will say is this: I have personally worked with dogs and humans that were very, very close to the end of their lives. And so have other people that I've trained, or other people that have read my book and applied the methods. And there is some very significant improvement in quality of life, despite maybe the dog not being able to get up and start running or even walking with vitality again. But there is a very, very beautiful change that can happen. I'm thinking about a dog who was a golden retriever, and she was 16 and a half, almost 17, I think. And that's pretty old, right? Especially for a golden retriever. And at the very end of her life, she was pretty much bedbound. She wasn't getting up and walking very easily. She needed a lot of help. And her person asked me to come and work with her. And what was so rewarding about that was I could see the relief in the dog as I, gently, gently worked with her and moved her limbs in a very intentional way, and helped her relieve any discomfort that she was having in her body. And we were able to breathe together and have this just wonderful, relaxing time together for her. And it was so gratifying because her person just could see also, like, the relief. She noticed how the dog's breathing got more relaxed. So there are a lot of things that you can do to relieve discomfort, to relieve a sense of effort that your dog may be experiencing as they get older. And of course, I do this with humans as well, and horses and all kinds of animals. So there are definitely things we can do. Another story I'm thinking about is a woman who I never met. I never met her or her dog, but I saw a picture of her dog, and she read my book. And the dog was 17 and dying of liver cancer. And they had done all the treatments, the surgeries, all that stuff already, but things were going in a certain direction. And the dog was having difficulty breathing. Not to the point that it was time to let the dog go, but enough that it was definitely disconcerting and definitely interfering with quality of life. And she applied something that I teach in my book, which is connected breathing. And she was just so blown away with how it helped her, really feel even closer to her dog than she already did, but also it could calm them both and help them both have this more relaxed, comfortable breathing. And it brought her so much peace. She felt it brought a lot of peace to the dog, And then the dog did transition after a period of time. They had to make that decision, but it was very peaceful. And her last weeks were very peaceful. So this is something that, again, it's not about necessarily, obviously turning the clock back totally. Things happen in life, right? And we all will meet that end at some point, but it's improving the quality of life for you and your dog all along the journey. So there's so many things you can do to make it easier. So if we think about what it means to feel youthful, and that may mean something different for you than it does to me. But when I think about a feeling of being youthful, it's a time of curiosity, right? It's being really curious about things. It's being very creative. It's being very playful, right? It's, having a lot of vitality, right? It's all of those things. It's having a lot of optimism, a lot of hope, right? A lot of planning for the future. So these are things we can bring into our lives at any age. And again, we can apply this to our dogs. Luckily, as I said earlier, our dogs aren't encumbered by a lot of the chatter that goes in our own heads, right? A lot of the beliefs that we have or misconceptions we may hold about things. But we can also purposely think about embracing more curiosity. I like to use the term compassionate curiosity, which means curiosity without the judgment attached to it. Right? You're not criticizing something, you're just noticing it and you're just like, "Oh, well that's interesting." And then you get really curious about how, if it's something that you'd rather not have, you'd rather not experience, or your dog, for you or your dog, like how would you change that? How could you improve that? So you get really curious about it. That in turn drives different processes in your nervous system to search for solutions. Okay, your brain then will want to search for solutions. Again, this leads to more of a youthful state, right? It's a learning state. We're learning so much when we're young, right? So we can continue that at any age. I had a client years ago who her grandfather was 96. He was a medical doctor. And at the age of 96, he was working on his third PhD. Now, how cool is that? How cool is that? And that's something I can talk about too with my own dad, who's since passed away, and he lived to be over 96, and he was always learning, always learning. There was always something else to learn. So he was always diving into textbooks and different things. Like he was so curious. So, and to me, he was always youthful, always youthful. And I'll tell you a quick story about what happened to him. I think he was 94. Yes, he was 94 at the time. He broke his pelvis 2 places. So it was pretty bad. And we were told he would have to be in rehab for like 6 to 8 weeks and all these other things. And what he did was really interesting because he decided that he was going to really harness his mental energy to imagine that he was fully healed. So he was like imagining his pelvic bones being fully healed. And he was also imagining all the things that he normally did. He was extremely active. He lived independently. He had a big property and he did everything himself. And he was imagining all that. So he harnessed his mental energies to not be complacent and say, "Oh, I have to be here for, X amount of weeks," but instead he did something about it. So to me, that was youthful in the fact that, and he did all the PT and the OT that they were giving him, and he was just like doing all the things. And he was released incredibly early. Like I think he was there just a week or so. It was amazing. And he went on to live independently again. And I just think that was such a good example of how he wasn't going to just accept the fact that he had this injury, because many people, many professionals told him and told us, "Oh, he'll never be able to be independent again." That wasn't the case at all. Now, Your mileage may differ. So again, this doesn't apply across the board, but my dad was a great example on how he embraced curiosity. He embraced learning. He embraced optimism. Right? So he harnessed his mind to work in his favor. Now, you might be harnessing your mind, which I hope not, in the opposite direction. Many people are, because they would just take all that information and say, oh my goodness, I will never be able to do those things again. And again, you need to be realistic, okay? But use, you know, use your brain to help you. Use your brain to be, yes, you take in the advice of the professionals, and then you also help yourself. There was no harm in imagining that his bones were knitting back together perfectly. There was no harm in imagining that he was out shoveling snow again, or raking leaves, or, cleaning horse corrals, or whatever, right? There was no harm in that. So, and it, in my opinion, probably helped him, and certainly was really good for his mental outlook. And again, he went on to fully heal from that and to go back to being independent. So these are things that are within our control. Okay. So, it's just a different way of looking at life. So the other thing I want to say is another way to increase this feeling of youthfulness for yourself and for your dog is to bring novelty into your life and into your dog's life. That means you change up the routine, not in a way that's going to alarm your dog, but simple things. You you go new places, you do things a little differently. You start to look at your routines that might be keeping you stuck. And when you do things a little bit differently, and might be something simple like putting the leash on with your non-dominant hand, or something like that. I mean, it could be anything. But when you start doing things differently, that really gets the attention of your nervous system, of your brain. So new neural connections are formed, and it stimulates your brain. It stimulates this process called neuroplasticity, where our brain is constantly adapting to the environment. So we want to keep that going, right? So that you're aging, if you will, in a very healthy direction, right? As you go along, you're still creating new neural connections, new movement opportunities can come up. In other words, you're not stuck in the same old routine. The other benefit of this, by the way, when you bring more novelty into your life, it slows down your perception of time. People also often talk about, as they get older, time seems to go faster. And it is based on our perception, because it's like when you're a little kid and, you're waiting for Christmas, for example, right? That seems like a really long time if it's the summer or something like that. And then as you get older, it's like, oh, Thanksgiving is here before you know it, and then Christmas, and then New Year's, and, the year just flew by. But when you bring more novelty, more variation into your life, your perception of time can slow, which is really pretty cool. It's like you get deeper into the experience of living, right? More like you did when you were a kid. And this is good for your dog as well, like doing things non-habitually, because it stimulates and enriches your dog's life as well. And again, they're forming new neural connections. So maybe instead of, walking around the block like you normally do, you go a different way, or you put your dog in the car and you go somewhere completely different. You walk over different surfaces, you go around things, you meet different people, you do things that of course are safe for you and your dog, but different. So that's another thing that you can do. And then the other thing is like really thinking about bringing more play into your life. And this could be true again at any age for you, or any age of your dog. I've seen a lot of people do this and I love it. Like some dogs are really into playing with their ball, and they want you to throw the ball over and over and over again. And that's great when the dog is 5 years old. But what happens when the dog is 15? And that's not really an option, maybe, for your dog. And, you see people do all kinds of wonderful adaptations. Like maybe the dog is lying down and all you can do is really like roll the ball to your dog and the dog loves it, right? And you can still play different enrichment games with your dog, maybe like food puzzles and things like that that bring a sense of play. Or you can teach a dog, and believe it or not, despite that saying you can't teach an old dog new tricks, you can certainly teach your dog things at any age. So something like nose work, for example, that's gaining in popularity, you know, you can teach that to a dog even when they're much older, right? So for the most part. So these are things that you can do. And it also, again, it's maybe novel for you, right? Maybe you have to learn all about how to, teach nose work. And it's something fun that you can do with your dog. So these are different things that you can just bring more into your life to help with this idea of like being more youthful despite whatever chronological age you or your dog may have. So I would say a couple of ideas. Um, if you haven't gotten my book, Grow Young with Your Dog, you might want to get it. Maybe it's available at your library. You can find it wherever books are sold online, or Barnes and Nobles has it, as well as Amazon. I also sell a PDF version on my website, and I'll link to all that in the show notes. So that's one idea. The other thing I'd recommend too is I have a free video training. By the way, when you purchase the book, it does come with online videos to support you. So you'll have access to that, and it'll tell you how in the book. But if you want a different free training, I do have one. All you need to go to is marydebono.com/love dog. That's all lowercase, all one word, and that'll be in the show notes. So don't worry about writing it down, especially if you're driving right now. So, yeah, so let's kind of redefine or reframe how we think about aging. Can we think about aging as an opportunity to experience life in a different way, in an exciting way, in a way that gives us more joy, more enrichment? We can let go of a lot of things maybe we used to worry about when we were younger, things we were concerned with that we realized over time are really insignificant. And can we use this time with our dogs to deepen our connection with our dog? If you're anything like me, you find great joy, like a blissful feeling in that feeling of connection with your dog. And you can have that at any age and any condition of you and your dog. So I hope you found this helpful. Let me know what fun thing that you're doing that's novel. Like maybe this has really, piqued your curiosity and you're like, oh, see, curiosity, that's another sign of youthfulness, remember? But think about, you know, so like a little challenge, like what can you do different today? What can you do differently tomorrow? And then let me know. I would love to hear from you. You can always email me, mary@marydebono.com, and let me know what you're dealing with. Let me know what you're adding into your life and your dog's life to make it more novel, to have more variety, to have more stimulation. Okay, thank you so much for joining me. I so appreciate you listening. I love sharing this work with you, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Bye for now.